My parents called my 12-year-old a mistake. At their anniversary, they gave her cousin the estate and $500,000 trust. I didn't cry. I smiled and revealed my daughter was. They went pale. I am 36 years old, and if there is one thing I have learned about family, it is that blood does not guarantee loyalty. Sometimes, blood just gives people a map of exactly where to stab you so it hurts the most. My name is Valerie. I am a freelance writer, a single mother, and for the vast majority of my life, I was the designated disappointment of my family. If you grew up in a household ruled by narcissists, you already know the cast of characters. You have the golden child, the one who can do absolutely no wrong. In my family, that was my older sister, Daphne. And then you have the scapegoat, the one whose very existence is treated like an inconvenience. That was me. My parents did not raise children. They curated a museum of achievements. They wanted trophies they could brag about at country club dinners and neighborhood barbecues. Daphne was their masterpiece. She married a wealthy, well-connected man named Julian, lived in a pristine house, and had a daughter named Penelope, who was essentially a miniature, perfectly polished version of Daphne herself. Penelope played the violin, spoke basic French by age 6, and knew exactly how to smile for the cameras. She was the golden grandchild. And then there was me. I got pregnant young. The father faded out of the picture before the ink on the birth certificate was even dry. Some men simply walk away when they realize they do not want to be the villain in their own story, leaving you to carry the entire weight of the world. I raised my daughter, Hazel, completely on my own. I figured out how to stretch a single dollar into 5. I learned how to type articles with one hand while stirring macaroni and cheese with the other. I became the kind of mother who could manage a grocery run, a pediatrician appointment, and a looming deadline all in the same afternoon without breaking a sweat. But my parents did not see a hardworking single mother. They saw a cautionary tale. They looked at my life and saw a mess that embarrassed them. Hazel, my beautiful, sensitive, and fiercely observant daughter, never stood a chance in their eyes. She was the offspring of the scapegoat, which meant she inherited my status at the bottom of the family hierarchy. Whenever we walked into my parents' massive, over-decorated home for Sunday dinners, the air would immediately shift. Daphne and Penelope were greeted with cheers and lavish embraces. Hazel and I were greeted with polite, strained smiles, the kind you give to a door-to-door salesman you are trying to get rid of. I spent years swallowing my pride, telling myself that it was just their way, that keeping the peace was better than starting a war. But keeping the peace in a toxic family usually just means you are quietly absorbing all the violence. And the violence they inflicted on my 12-year-old daughter was something I could no longer ignore. The dynamic went from passive aggression to active cruelty when Hazel started school and began to struggle. She did not just hate homework. She fought a daily, agonizing battle with the alphabet. I would sit next to her at our small kitchen table, watching her stare at the pages of her reading assignments. She would describe the letters as shifting around, refusing to stay still. She would lose her place on the page, read a word perfectly 1 minute, and completely fail to recognize it the next. It was incredibly painful to watch her bright, creative mind get trapped behind a wall of scrambled text. She would get so angry at herself, slapping her hands against the table, convinced that it was a moral failure. One evening, she slammed her textbook shut, looked at me with tears streaming down her face, and asked, "Why can my brain not just work like everyone else's? Am I stupid?" That question broke something deep inside me. I got her evaluated, and the diagnosis was clear. Dyslexia. It is not a tragedy, and it certainly does not mean a person is not intelligent. In fact, Hazel has a memory that rivals a steel trap. She can recall the exact details of a conversation from 3 weeks ago. She connects patterns and ideas in ways that constantly amaze me. She just processes written information differently in a world that demands everyone fit into a neat, linear box. When I told my parents about the diagnosis, hoping for a shred of empathy or understanding, I received the exact opposite. They did not see a neurodivergent child who needed a little extra patience. They saw a defective product. My mother gave a dramatic sigh and said, "Well, what did you expect, Valerie? Children need a structured home with two parents." It is a shame she is falling so far behind Penelope. The comparisons became relentless. At every family gathering, my father would loudly ask Daphne about Penelope's straight-A report card, making sure everyone in the room was listening. Then he would turn to Hazel, pat her on the head like a slow-witted dog, and say, "And how are you doing, sweetie? Still struggling to keep up? Just do your best, not everyone can be a genius." They weaponized her learning difference. They dressed their judgment up as concern. If Hazel took too long to read a greeting card during the holidays, my mother would chuckle and tell her to hurry up because they would all be dead of old age before she finished. Daphne would sit there, sipping her wine, smiling serenely as her daughter Penelope snatched the card away and read it flawlessly to loud applause. My parents effectively labeled my daughter as the dumb one. They made sure she knew her place. They systematically chipped away at a little girl's self-esteem just to make themselves feel superior. And the sickest part of it all was that they did it with smiles on their faces, calling it tough love. There was only one person in that entire bloodline who saw through the charade, and that was my grandmother, Miriam. She was my mother's mother, but they could not have been more different. My mother performed kindness when there was an audience to applaud her. Grandma Miriam was just simply kind. Her house smelled like old books and peppermint tea, and it was the only place where Hazel's shoulders would physically drop the moment we walked through the door. Miriam never spoke to Hazel as if she were fragile or broken. She treated her like a whole person. I remember one specific Sunday afternoon. We had skipped the usual toxic family dinner to visit Miriam. Hazel was helping her bake and was trying to read the measurements off a faded, handwritten recipe card. Hazel stumbled over a word, her face instantly tightening, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting my mother to walk in and laugh at her. Miriam gently placed her hand over the card. She looked at Hazel and asked, "Do you know what truly smart people do?" Hazel shook her head, looking down at her shoes. Miriam lifted Hazel's chin and said, "They ask for what they need, and they never, ever apologize for how their brain works. Take your time. The flour is not going anywhere." They spent the next 20 minutes reading that card together, slowly, sounding out every syllable without a single ounce of judgment or pressure. Later that evening, when Hazel was watching television in the other room, Miriam called me into the kitchen. She looked older than usual, her hands trembling slightly as she held her teacup. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "They are doing it again." I knew exactly what she meant. "They did it to you your whole life," Miriam continued, her voice low and furious. "And now they are doing it to that sweet little girl. They are going to break her spirit just to build up their own egos." I tried to brush it off, giving a tired laugh, saying it was just how they were and that I was used to it. But Miriam slammed her hand on the table, startling me. "You being used to it does not make it right, Valerie," she said sharply. Then she leaned in, her eyes burning with an intensity one had never seen before. "Promise me something right now. If your parents ever publicly humiliate that child, if they ever try to cast her out or make her feel like she does not belong in this family, you will not sit there and swallow it. You will stand up and you will fight back. Promise me." I promised her. I did not know it at the time, but that promise was the foundation of the explosion that was about to rip our family apart. Miriam passed away 6 months later, leaving us completely exposed to the storm. The funeral of Grandma Miriam was a masterclass in narcissistic performance art. If you did not know my family, you would have thought my mother was the most devoted, heartbroken daughter to ever walk the earth. She draped herself over the casket, sobbing loudly enough for the echoes to reach the back pews of the church. My father played the role of the stoic, supportive patriarch, shaking hands with distant relatives and business associates, turning a memorial service into an impromptu networking event. Daphne and Julian stood near the front, dressed in immaculate, expensive black clothing, looking like a grieving royal family. Penelope was instructed to hand out tissues, looking appropriately sad on command. Meanwhile, Hazel and I were seated 3 rows back. We were the ghosts of the family, visible only when someone needed to be reminded of how good they had it. The shift in the power dynamic was immediate and terrifying. While Miriam was alive, she acted as a silent shield. My parents were careful not to push their cruelty too far when she was watching, because Miriam controlled a significant portion of the family wealth, and narcissists respect nothing more than money. But with Miriam gone, the leash was off. At the reception following the burial, the subtle jabs started immediately. The catering was laid out on long tables, and Hazel, still incredibly sad about losing her great-grandmother, was trying to read the small labels placed next to the food. She hesitated, squinting at a card in front of a tray of sandwiches. My father walked past, flanked by two of his golf buddies. He did not even slow down as he said, loudly enough for the entire food line to hear, "For heaven's sake, Valerie, just read it to her. We do not have all day to wait for the dumb one to figure out what turkey is." His friends chuckled awkwardly. Daphne, standing nearby, just rolled her eyes and sighed, muttering something about how Hazel was always holding up the line. My mother did not say a word to defend her granddaughter. She simply turned her back and continued complaining to her sister, Aunt Mabel, about how exhausted she was from organizing such a perfect funeral. I watched Hazel's face crumble. She dropped her plate and practically ran to the bathroom. I followed her, sitting on the cold tile floor of a church restroom, holding my daughter while she cried into my shoulder. The shield was gone. My parents had officially decided that Hazel was nothing more than an easy target for their amusement. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. The era of keeping the peace was over, but I did not yet have the weapon I needed to fight the war. 3 weeks after the funeral, the weapon arrived at my front door. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. Hazel was in her room trying to finish a science project, and I was in our cramped kitchen, scrubbing a frying pan and worrying about how I was going to pay the upcoming heating bill. There was a sharp knock at the door. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it to find a man standing there. He was wearing an incredibly expensive charcoal suit and a long cashmere overcoat. He looked entirely out of place in my rundown apartment complex. He introduced himself as Mr. Gallagher. He was the attorney who had managed Grandma Miriam's estate for the last 2 decades. My immediate thought was panic. When you are a struggling single mother, lawyers showing up at your door at night never means anything good. I assumed my parents were trying to stick me with some leftover medical bills or funeral expenses. I invited him in, apologizing for the clutter. He did not sit down. He stood near the kitchen counter, holding a thick leather folder, looking at me with a very calm, assessing expression. He told me that Miriam had made some significant amendments to her estate planning in the months leading up to her death. He opened the leather folder and slid a sealed, heavy envelope across the cheap laminate of my kitchen counter. He explained the financial structure of the family. My parents lived in a massive, sprawling mansion, and they always acted as if they owned it outright. They constantly bragged about their wealth and their investments. But Mr. Gallagher calmly shattered that illusion. The house, he explained, was completely owned by Miriam's trust. Furthermore, there was a liquid family trust fund containing exactly $500,000. My parents were listed as the primary beneficiaries who enjoyed the occupancy of the house and the interest from the fund. They lived the lifestyle, but they did not hold the ultimate power. They were merely trustees managing the assets. Mr. Gallagher's voice remained perfectly flat, devoid of emotion, as he laid out these staggering numbers. $500,000 and a multi-million-dollar estate. It was more money than I could even comprehend. But then he looked toward the hallway, where the sound of Hazel's music was softly playing, and his voice dropped to a near whisper. He said, "Your grandmother was very much aware of the dynamic in your family. She knew what your parents were doing to your daughter. And she instructed me to ensure that they could not do it forever." I stared at the envelope, my heart pounding against my ribs. "What did she do?" I asked, my voice barely working. Mr. Gallagher tapped the envelope with his index finger. He explained that Miriam had established a highly specific legal condition. It was known as a trigger clause. This clause stated that if my parents ever made a documented, undeniable attempt to financially exclude, publicly humiliate, or disown Hazel in favor of Penelope, they would instantly forfeit their positions as trustees. If they pulled the trigger, the entire trust would be dissolved. The house would be sold, and the $500,000, along with the proceeds from the estate sale, would bypass my parents entirely and be split directly into two protected subtrusts, 50% for Penelope and 50% for Hazel. My parents would be left with absolutely nothing. They would lose the house, the money, and the prestige. But Mr. Gallagher emphasized, the proof had to be bulletproof. It could not be a simple rumor or a vague disagreement. It had to be something recorded, written, or stated in front of undeniable witnesses. It had to be an act of overt, undeniable cruelty. He pushed the envelope closer to me. He told me that I was not to use this as a threat. I was not to wave it in their faces to force them to be nice. It was not a negotiation tactic. It was an execution order. He told me to keep it safe, and if the day ever came when they crossed the line of no return, I knew exactly who to call. Then he picked up his briefcase, wished me a good evening, and walked out into the rain. I stood in my kitchen for a very long time, staring at that thick envelope. It felt like I was holding a live grenade. The power it contained was terrifying. I took the envelope, walked into my bedroom, and locked it inside a small fireproof safe at the bottom of my closet. I prayed I would never have to use it. I prayed that my parents, despite their flaws, would never be cruel enough to force my hand. But narcissists cannot help themselves. Their need to elevate the golden child while destroying the scapegoat is a compulsion. For months later, a heavy, cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was an invitation to my parents' grand 40th wedding anniversary gala. The calligraphy was dripping with gold foil, boasting about a celebration of family legacy. When I read the word legacy, a cold chill ran down my spine. I knew my parents. I knew they never threw a party just to celebrate, they threw parties to make announcements. I looked at the invitation, then I looked at the closet where the safe was hidden. The stage was being set, and I knew exactly what they were planning to do. Before I tell you what happened at that party, please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from. Every single comment helps push this video to more people who might be dealing with toxic families of their own. Thank you so much for the support. Now, let's get back to the story. The evening of my parents' 40th wedding anniversary finally arrived. The invitation had dictated formal attire, and the venue they chose was a sprawling, opulent country club that screamed old money and new insecurities. I drove Hazel there in my reliable, 10-year-old sedan, feeling the heavy, thick folder pressing against my side inside my oversized handbag. Hazel wore a simple, pretty blue dress that we had picked out together. She spent the entire car ride nervously smoothing down the fabric, asking me repeatedly if her hair looked okay. It breaks your heart to see a 12-year-old girl bracing herself for judgment before she has even walked through a door. I held her hand tightly in the parking lot and told her she looked beautiful, and that no matter what anyone said tonight, we were a team. Walking into that ballroom was like stepping onto a movie set designed by a megalomaniac. There were towering floral centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A string quartet was playing softly in the corner, and a professional videographer was circling the room with a massive camera mounted on his shoulder, capturing every forced smile and clinking champagne glass. Daphne and Julian were already holding court near the grand entrance. Penelope, the golden grandchild, was dressed in a shimmering silver gown that made her look like a miniature adult. She was completely surrounded by admiring relatives, soaking up the attention like a sponge. Hazel, bless her resilient heart, pulled out her phone. She told me she wanted to record the speeches and take pictures for memories. She said it with such innocent hope, as if she believed that if she just captured the right angle, she could force this family to look like a happy one. We had not even found our assigned table before my father made his first move. He was walking past us with a glass of scotch in his hand, laughing loudly with a business partner. He stopped, glanced down at Hazel holding her phone, and gave a condescending little chuckle. He leaned in and said, "Careful with that camera, sweetheart. Try to keep up with what is going on. We know how easily you get confused." Hazel laughed politely. It was that specific, hollow laugh that children use when they are trying to be easy, when they are trying to shrink themselves down so the adults will not hit them again. Then my mother swooped in, smelling of expensive perfume and gin. She kissed the air next to Hazel's cheek and said, "There is my little helper. Not granddaughter. Not sweetheart. Helper." Like Hazel was the hired staff. Hazel's smile twitched, but she kept her phone up, adjusting the angle. I squeezed my handbag. I did not say a word. I knew that arguing with a narcissist before the main event was a waste of ammunition. I just guided Hazel to our seats at the far end of the room, far away from the head table, and waited for the real performance to begin. Dinner was a blur of overly complicated courses and incredibly loud chatter. The room was buzzing. As the plates were cleared, the lights dimmed, and a massive projector screen lowered from the ceiling. A slideshow began to play. It was supposed to be a celebration of 40 years of family history. Instead, it was a 20-minute tribute to Daphne and Penelope. There were dozens of photos of Penelope winning awards, smiling on vacations, and posing in the center of the frame. There was exactly one photo of Hazel, and it was a blurry shot of her mid-sneeze from 3 Thanksgivings ago. Hazel saw it. I watched her see it. She did not cry. She just lowered her phone a little bit, her shoulders slumping. Then, the lights came back up, and my father tapped a microphone. The room immediately went silent. He stood at the head table, wrapping his arm around my mother, and launched into a long, self-congratulatory speech about building a legacy. He talked about hard work, traditional values, and the importance of leaving a mark on the world. He spoke like a king addressing his subjects. Then he smiled broadly, looking directly at Daphne and Penelope. He announced, his voice echoing through the massive speakers, that they were not just celebrating the past tonight, they were securing the future. My father said, loud and clear for the videographer to capture every syllable, that upon his and my mother's passing, their beautiful mansion would be left entirely to Penelope. The room erupted into polite applause. Daphne put her hand on Penelope's shoulder, looking terribly modest. But they were not finished. My mother stepped forward, taking the microphone from my father. She had that bright, camera-ready smile plastered on her face. She looked out into the crowd and added, "And the family trust fund, all $500,000 of it, goes to Penelope as well. All of it." She paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. And then, she looked directly at our table in the back. She looked right at my 12-year-old daughter, and she said into the microphone, "Hazel is not included." More applause followed. People actually cheered. They clapped their hands like Inheritance was a talent show and the dumb kid had just been officially eliminated. My father leaned into the microphone one last time and chuckled, saying, "Well, you know how it is. One is the genius, and the other one is the slow one. We have to protect our assets." The silence that followed at our table was deafening. Hazel's phone dipped so fast the camera caught the tablecloth. Her body reacted before her brain could even process the humiliation. She went perfectly still. She looked like she was trying to physically disappear into the chair to stop the pain. If you have never watched a child realize, in a room full of hundreds of people, that she is fundamentally unwanted by her own blood, I do not recommend it. It is a specific kind of agony that burns into your retinas. But I did not cry. The sadness evaporated, leaving behind a cold, absolute clarity. The trigger had been pulled. The trap was sprung. I stood up. I did not rush. I pushed my chair back slowly, the scraping sound cutting through the lingering applause. I did not feel brave, and I did not feel dramatic. I just felt incredibly steady, like my body had decided that we were done being afraid of these people. I picked up my heavy handbag, unzipped it, and pulled out the thick leather folder Mr. Gallagher had given me. I walked around the table and stood in the aisle, making sure I was in clear view of the videographer's lens. I smiled. A smile is incredibly disarming, but it is also a warning wrapped in politeness. I spoke loudly, projecting my voice across the silent ballroom. My voice did not shake. I said, "Actually, that is incredibly generous of you both to offer, but you do not own the house. And you do not own the $500,000 trust fund. The room did not stop all at once. It was like a wave hitting a shoreline. A few scattered claps died in midair. A laugh got stuck in Aunt Mabel's throat. My father blinked slowly, his brain trying to catch up with my words. My mother's hand tightened around her champagne flute so hard I thought the crystal would shatter. Daphne stood up halfway, her perfect posture crumbling. I did not give them time to build momentum or spin a lie. I kept speaking, loud and clear. I said, Grandma Miriam's trust owns the house and the fund. And she named my daughter, Hazel, as an equal, protected beneficiary. The silence that fell over the country club was absolute. It was not polite silence. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence where hundreds of people are holding their breath because they know something irreversible has just happened. My father's face went an unhealthy shade of purple. He gripped the edge of the table and leaned forward. Valerie, he hissed, his voice dropping the charming act entirely. Sit down right now. You are drunk. You do not know what you are talking about. My mother tried to force a laugh, looking at the crowd. Sweetheart, she said, her voice shrill and trembling, you must be confused. I held up the folder. I did not open it to read paragraphs of legal jargon. I just held it up high enough for the people at the front tables to see the official seal and Grandma Miriam's signature at the bottom of the front page. I looked my father dead in the eye and said, I got this from Grandma's attorney. The amendment was signed before she died. You were the trustees. Past tense. Because Grandma Miriam put a clause in her will. She knew you would do exactly this. She knew you would use a microphone to try and erase my child. And by doing so on camera tonight, you just triggered the clause that strips you of your trustee status completely. Julian, my brother-in-law, stepped forward, his face red with indignation. He pointed a finger at me and shouted that I was being inappropriate and ruining a beautiful evening. I almost laughed out loud. Yes, Julian, I thought, I am being inappropriate. But publicly erasing a child with a microphone is just fine, right? Let us discuss manners now that the money is threatened. My father realized the gravity of the situation. The panic set into his eyes. He started backpedaling instantly, the classic narcissistic pivot. He held up his hands and said, Valerie, be reasonable. We were speaking generally. We did not say Hazel gets absolutely nothing. We just meant Penelope would manage the bulk of it. It was a joke. I pointed directly at the videographer, whose camera was still rolling, capturing every single second of their panic. I asked my father if he wanted to tell that camera that he did not just call my daughter the slow one. I asked my mother if she wanted to swear she did not just say Hazel is not included. You cannot rewrite history when it is on tape, I said. My mother started to cry, real tears this time, tears of losing control. You are humiliating us, she sobbed, looking around at the guests who were now whispering and staring. I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing but pity. Funny how it only counts as humiliation when it happens to you, I replied quietly. You ruined a 12-year-old girl. I am just refusing to let you get away with it. I did not stay to argue the legal details. I did not stay to let them bait me into a screaming match. The point was never to win a shouting contest in front of an audience. The point was to burn their fake stage to the ground and walk away. I turned around, walked back to my table, and held my hand out to Hazel. Her eyes were wide, shining with unshed tears, but she took my hand. Let us go home, I told her. As we walked toward the exit, my father screamed across the room that this was not over, that he would hire a dozen lawyers and contest it. I did not even turn my head. I just kept walking, pulling my daughter out of the toxicity and into the cool night air. We did not even make it out of the country club parking lot before my phone started vibrating furiously in my purse. It was a relentless assault of calls and texts from my father, my mother, Daphne, and Aunt Mabel. They were panicking. The illusion had been shattered, and the rats were scrambling. I put the phone on silent and tossed it into the passenger seat. I needed to focus on the person sitting next to me. Hazel sat in the car staring out the window, her hands gripping her seatbelt. The silence in the car was heavy. About halfway home, she finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. Am I in trouble? Did I ruin their party? That question hit me harder than anything my parents had said all night. It is the tragic conditioning of the scapegoat child. They are trained to believe that any explosion, even one caused by the abuse they suffered, is somehow their fault. I pulled the car over into a brightly lit gas station parking lot. I put it in park, unbuckled my seatbelt, and turned to face her fully. "No," I said, my voice firm and absolute. "You are not in trouble. You did absolutely nothing wrong. They ruined their own night because they are mean, selfish people." Hazel swallowed hard, a tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. "But what does beneficiary mean?" she asked. "Does it mean I am dumb and need charity?" My chest tightened. I reached over and wiped the tear away. "It means Grandma Miriam loved you," I explained softly. "It means she knew you were smart and funny and perfectly capable of doing amazing things. She knew you had dyslexia and that some things are harder for you, but she also knew that does not make you worth any less than Penelope. She wanted you protected from people who do not understand that." Hazel nodded slowly, processing the information. "I do not want them to hate me," she whispered. "I know," I told her. "But sometimes, people hating you is just proof that you stood up for yourself." When we finally got back to our apartment, I made 2 huge mugs of hot chocolate. We sat on the couch, wrapped in blankets, and watched a silly comedy movie until Hazel finally drifted off to sleep. Once I carried her to bed, I went straight to my laptop. I pulled up my email and drafted a message to Mr. Gallagher. I did not write a long, emotional essay. I just typed, "The triggering event occurred tonight on record." Attached is a brief summary. "I will secure the video footage from the videographer tomorrow, but there were over 100 witnesses." I hit send at exactly 6:12 in the morning. I sat in the dark kitchen, watching the sun come up, knowing the war was about to begin. At 7 in the morning, the confirmation email bounced back from Mr. Gallagher. It was short and ruthlessly professional. He acknowledged receipt of my notice and stated that the administrative steps to freeze the trust and remove the current trustees would begin immediately. Administrative steps. It sounds so boring until those steps are aimed like a laser-guided missile at the people who tried to destroy you. By 8 in the morning, the flying monkeys began their assault. Aunt Mabel left a 5-minute voicemail crying about how I was tearing the family apart over a simple misunderstanding. Daphne texted me a massive paragraph calling me a jealous, bitter failure who was trying to steal Penelope's future. I did not reply to any of them. I just took screenshots, saved the voicemails, and built my fortress of evidence. You cannot argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. It is like trying to teach algebra to a brick wall. I managed to get Hazel up, fed, and dropped off at middle school. I kissed her forehead and told her to have a great day, pretending everything was normal. I drove to a local coffee shop to try and get some freelance work done, but my hands were shaking too much to type. My instinct was screaming that my parents were not going to just sit quietly and wait for the lawyers. Narcissists do not accept defeat, they escalate. My instinct was correct. At 1:30 in the afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Hazel's middle school. I answered immediately, my heart jumping into my throat. The receptionist on the other end sounded cheerful, completely unaware that she was navigating a minefield. "Hi Valerie," she said brightly. "We just wanted to quickly confirm something. Hazel's grandparents are here in the front office. They said there is a family emergency and they need to sign her out early for the weekend." My blood ran ice cold. The air left my lungs. My parents had realized that their financial control was evaporating, so they were pivoting to emotional control. They wanted to get to Hazel. They wanted to corner a 12-year-old girl, manipulate her, confuse her, and probably force her to say she misunderstood the situation at the party. They were trying to manufacture a defense, and they were using my child as a pawn to do it. "Do not let them near her," I said, my voice cutting through the phone like a knife. "Do not call Hazel down to the office. I am on my way right now." I hung up the phone, threw a $20 bill on the cafe table, and sprinted to my car. I drove like an absolute maniac. Every red light felt like an hour. The thought of my mother putting her hands on Hazel, whispering poison into her ear to save her own bank account, made me see red. I burst through the double doors of the middle school front office, breathing heavily. My mother was standing at the counter, wearing her designer sunglasses indoors, leaning in and chatting up the receptionist with that fake, sugary sweetness she used to manipulate service workers. My father was pacing near the waiting chairs, looking impatient and furious that the school protocol was slowing him down. When my mother saw me walk in, her fake smile dropped for a fraction of a second before returning, stretched tight and anxious. "Valerie," she said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "We were just coming to get our granddaughter. We thought she might be traumatized from your little outburst last night. We wanted to talk to her." I ignored her completely. I walked straight up to the receptionist, placed my hands flat on the counter, and said in a voice loud enough for the entire office to hear, "I need to update my emergency contact list immediately. Remove these two people. They are never authorized to pick up my daughter under any circumstances." The receptionist looked terrified, her hands hovering over her keyboard. My father stopped pacing and marched over to me, his face turning red. "You cannot do that," he growled, lowering his voice to avoid a scene. "We are her grandparents. We have rights. We can handle this privately, Valerie. Stop acting like a crazy person." I turned slowly to face him. I did not shrink back. I stood tall, looking right into the eyes of the man who had terrified me for 36 years. "You had your chance to handle things privately," I told him, keeping my voice perfectly level and icy. "But you chose to use a microphone. You do not get to corner my child and manipulate her just because your bank accounts are being frozen." My mother grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug into my jacket. "Please, Valerie," she whispered frantically. "Call the lawyer. Tell him to stop. We will apologize to Hazel. We will buy her whatever she wants. We did not mean it." I looked down at her hand and then back up at her face. I felt a profound sense of disgust. "You already did the damage," I said, shaking her hand off me. "And you are only apologizing because you are losing the house. Now leave this school. Both of you. Leave right now, or I will ask the principal to call the police and have you trespassed." My father opened his mouth to shout, but he looked around. Teachers were peering out of the staff room. A few parents walking through the hallway were stopping to stare. The audience was watching, and he was not the hero of the play anymore. He swallowed his rage, his jaw clenching so hard I thought his teeth would crack. "Fine," he spat. "You are dead to us. We will handle this in court." He grabbed my mother's arm and dragged her out of the office. I stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline process through my system. Then I asked the receptionist to call Hazel down. When she walked into the office and saw me, her eyes darted around nervously. "Are they gone?" she asked. I knelt down, wrapped my arms around her, and held her tight. "They are gone," I promised her. "And they are never going to surprise you again." The legal system moves slowly, but a watertight trust document designed by a very angry grandmother moves with terrifying precision. About 3 weeks after the anniversary disaster, the official certified mail arrived at my parents' massive mansion. I did not have to guess what their reaction was, because Aunt Mabel, the family gossip who plays both sides, immediately texted me a blurry photograph of the documents sitting on my parents' granite kitchen island. The bold text at the top of the first page was beautiful in its simplicity. "Notice of trustee removal." Directly beneath it was the kill shot. "Notice of termination of occupancy benefit." It was a very polite, highly expensive legal way of saying, "Pack your bags, you are being evicted." 10 minutes after Aunt Mabel sent the text, my phone rang. It was my mother. Against my better judgment, I answered, but I immediately pressed the record button on my screen. Her voice was pure, unadulterated hysteria. "Valerie, this is insane." She shrieked into the phone. "You cannot do this. They are giving us 30 days to vacate. Where are we supposed to go? All of our things are here." In the background, I could hear my father throwing things. Actual, physical destruction. He was screaming curses, not his usual polished, passive-aggressive remarks, but the raw, frantic yelling of a man who had lost his kingdom. I let her cry and ramble for 2 solid minutes. I listened to her cycle through the classic narcissistic stages. First, she played the victim, saying I was incredibly cruel and heartless. Then, she tried gaslighting, insisting they never actually said Hazel got nothing, that the video was taken out of context. Finally, she moved to bargaining, promising they would set up a small college fund for Hazel if I just called Mr. Gallagher and canceled the eviction. When she finally ran out of breath, I spoke. My voice was calm, almost bored. I cannot stop it, I told her. And, even if I could, I would not. Grandma Miriam set the rules, and you chose to break them in front of 100 witnesses. My father must have snatched the phone from her. You planned this, you bitter little failure. He roared into the receiver. You have been waiting to steal from us your whole life. I felt my pulse stay completely steady. Then you should probably stop yelling, I replied, because you are on speakerphone, I am recording this conversation, and you are just giving Mr. Gallagher more evidence of your instability. Total silence fell on the other end of the line. I hung up, blocked their numbers, and finally exhaled. The mansion went on the market shortly after the 30-day eviction notice expired. It sold quickly to a tech executive for over $1.2 million. My parents did not see a single penny of that sale. The money went straight back into the trust, just as the documents dictated. After closing costs, legal fees, and the original $500,000 were combined, the entire fortune was split perfectly down the middle. One half went into a heavily protected educational and living trust for Penelope. The other half went into an identical, ironclad trust for Hazel, untouchable by anyone until she turned 25. With their assets frozen and the house sold out from under them, my parents experienced a severe reality check. They had lived way beyond their actual liquid means, assuming the trust would float them forever. Desperate, they turned to the only person they thought would save them. They packed up what they could and went straight to Daphne and Julian, expecting the golden child to open the doors of her pristine home and rescue them. But here is the fascinating thing about raising a golden child. If you spend 30 years teaching a person that they are the center of the universe, that money is the only measure of success, and that compassion is for the weak, you cannot be surprised when they apply those exact lessons to you. Daphne refused to take them in. She told them very plainly that she and Julian did not have the space, which was a blatant lie considering their house had 6 bedrooms. She refused to give them a dime of her own money, and she certainly was not going to let them touch Penelope's newly acquired trust fund. Daphne blamed my parents entirely for being stupid enough to use a microphone and trigger the clause. She cut them off financially and emotionally, protecting her own image and wealth, leaving them completely stranded. My parents were forced to downsize drastically. They moved into a cramped, 2-bedroom rental apartment in a town 30 miles away. There was no grand dining room to host extravagant dinners. There were no country club memberships, no luxury cars, and no audience to applaud their every move. They became just 2 bitter, isolated people sitting in a small living room, finally forced to look at each other without the distraction of wealth to hide their flaws. It has been 4 years since the anniversary party. Hazel is now 16 years old. She is thriving in high school, and while dyslexia is still a part of her life, it no longer defines her. With the help of specialized tutors that I could finally afford with peace of mind, she has learned how to manage it beautifully. More importantly, she carries herself with a quiet confidence. She knows she is smart, she knows she is loved, and she knows she is entirely worthy of respect. As for me, I went completely no contact with my parents, Daphne, and anyone else who tried to guilt-trip me about the situation. I lost a toxic family, but I gained an incredible amount of peace. I no longer wake up with that knot of anxiety in my stomach. I no longer have to spend my Sundays performing for people who want me to fail. Occasionally, I will hear through the grapevine that my parents still talk about me. They tell extended relatives and anyone who will listen that I am a greedy, manipulative daughter who destroyed their lives and tore the family apart over a harmless misunderstanding. They still refuse to take a shred of accountability. They have rewritten the narrative to make themselves the tragic victims of my supposed jealousy. But I do not care anymore. I have the video, I have the legal documents, and most importantly, I have a happy, Healthy daughter who knows that her mother will burn the world down to protect her. I cut my parents out of our lives completely to protect my daughter, leaving them with absolutely nothing. They still tell extended family that I destroyed their lives over a harmless misunderstanding. Am I the bad guy here, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on these wild family stories. Leave your verdict in the comments below.